Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Welcome to a special episode of DCC Shop. In this episode, instead of working on a train, I'm going to build a multi-gauge, multi-scale programming track. If you're familiar with DCC systems, you may know that most DCC manufacturers caution against connecting the programming track output to the normal track output. This can potentially destroy your DCC system. Some people make a programming track as part of a layout and often build in some kind of electrical switch or lockout, which in theory should keep a train from bridging the gap between the programming track and the rest of the layout. This seems risky to me though, so I would advocate for a completely disconnected track. Because I work in multiple scales, I thought it would be nice to have a single programming track I could use for all my models. I also get tired of the mess and setup time every time I want to use my LokProgrammer. So my goal is to build a multi-gauge, multi-scale programming track that can be used with either my LokProgrammer or with the programming track output from another DCC system. I want something that's easy to set up and can be stored when not in use. As a side goal, I want to make this programming track with materials I already have on hand, so I'm going to try not to go out and buy anything. I work in NN3, N, HO, and FN3 large scale. Most of my DCC-equipped locomotives have ESU LokSound decoders, so having a LokProgrammer is essential. I have this wood left over from a previous project that I'm going to use for the base. It's about 12 inches wide and slightly under 4 feet long. I've mocked up some tracks to make sure that everything will fit. The large-scale track is from a train set that I bought secondhand. The quality isn't that great and I wouldn't use it on the garden layout, but I think it'll be fine for this purpose. This is some HO Kato unitrack. This is N unitrack. And this Z-gauge track for my NN3 equipment is from Microtrains. I didn't include O since the only O scale I have is 3-rail and that's an entirely different animal. I am leaving some space though, just in case. My idea is to have the tracks fastened down and then mount the LokProgrammer on one end of the board. I'm also going to use a toggle switch and some screw terminals. That will allow me to use the track with another DCC programming track output. I could also hook it up to a DC power pack and use it as a test track. I've cut some additional pieces from more scraps of the same wood. These thin pieces will be a stop on one end. The LokProgrammer software has a mode that allows a locomotive to be run. I've never had any issues, but just in case a locomotive should decide to take off like a rocket, the stop will hopefully keep it from launching itself onto the floor. These pieces are for the other end. I've hollowed out one piece to make a cavity to hide most of the wires. I drilled some holes in one end to get the wires to the tracks. On the piece that will be the lid, I've drilled partway through the back with a Forstner bit to make a space for the toggle switch. I've cut the large-scale track to length. I wasn't sure if it would be solderable or not, but thankfully it is. I'll connect feeder wires at one end. I'm using 26-gauge stranded wire for all my connections. I'll pull the wires through one of the holes in the hollowed-out piece of wood that's now glued to the base. The track has holes in it, so I'm going to use small wood screws to fasten it down. I lucked out with the other tracks and didn't end up having to cut any of them. The N-scale track won't fit with the rail joiners on the ends, so I'm using a Kato rail joiner removal tool to take them off. The Kato unitrack has mounting posts underneath. I'm going to drill these out. Then I can screw the unitrack down from the top. On a layout, I wouldn't want exposed screw heads in my track like this, but for a programming track it's fine. The screws are below the rail head, so they shouldn't interfere with the locomotives. I ran the wires for the Z-gauge track through the same hole I used for the N-scale track. The Z-gauge track is too small to use screws. Fortunately, the track has holes in it already. I have some micro-engineering small spikes, so I'm going to use those to fasten down the Z-gauge. I'll push the spikes into the wood with some needle nose pliers. I should mention that I'm not too concerned about track spacing, as typically only one locomotive at a time is going to be on this programming track. That completes the track work. The double pole, double throw toggle switch that I'm using was salvaged from an old layout. I've gotten rid of the old wires and soldered new ones. On the piece that will be the lid, in addition to the hole for the switch, I've pre-drilled a screw hole for the LokProgrammer, a couple holes for wires, and holes to mount the screw terminals. Now I can start installing the components. The toggle switch fits in from the back. It's a little tight, but it'll work. After everything is mounted, I've connected one set of wires to the screw terminals on the LokProgrammer. I've used crimp connectors so I can attach the other wires to the screw terminal. I really only need 2 screw terminals for this, but I used one with 4 since that's what I had available. This is what it looks like underneath. The wires are crossed because the electrical connections on the switch are on the opposite side of the thing the handle is pointing toward. I've grouped the white wires from the tracks and soldered them together and done the same with the black wires. This will mean that all the tracks will be electrically connected, but that's okay. As I mentioned before, normally there will only be one locomotive on this programming track at a time, regardless of size. You could use a fancier switching setup if you wanted, but for my purposes this should work fine. Now I just need to connect the wires from the switch to the wires from the track. A little heat shrink tubing will help to prevent shorts. I'll attach the lid and that's it. Just to make sure the wiring is good, I've hooked up a DC power pack to the screw terminals. I'll test each track in turn. It looks good so far. After disconnecting the power pack, I'll flip the switch so I can try out the LokProgrammer. Using my North Coast 060 number 108 as a test, I can read information from the decoder. I can also drive the model using the LokProgrammer's driver's cab feature. Everything's working like it should. I'm glad I took the time to conceal most of the wiring, as there's less to snag if I move this around or in and out of a closet. Having this will definitely speed up the process the next time I need to use my LokProgrammer. I'm looking forward to trying it out on my next DCC install. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and I think I'm going to get a lot of use out of it in the future. If you like this video, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.